In today's video, we have some news out of Calgary regarding their head coaching position. We also have a potential extension in the works for Alex Ovechkin in Washington, and we have some NHL trade rumors focusing on the Coyotes, the Oilers, the Blues, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's get right into it here. We have some news out of the Flames organization. First up, we have Mark Giordano has been awarded the Mark Messier Leadership Award. Of course, that was announced last night during the NHL's last playoff game. So congratulations to Mark Giordano. Of course, he's been a longtime captain, great leader of the Flames, so certainly well-deserved. And we also got some news just a little while ago regarding the head coaching position. Jeff Ward, of course, who's been there on an interim basis since he took over from Bill Peters after he was let go by the Flames earlier this season, has now been officially named the full-time permanent head coach of the Flames and has also signed a 2-year contract extension. We had last heard about this from Elliot Friedman on Saturday Headlines, where he said the Flames were kind of trending in the direction that it was looking like Ward was going to be the guy, but there was no official word yet from the team. They were waiting for confirmation of that, but that now is indeed has been made official by the franchise as they made that announcement just earlier this afternoon. So Jeff Ward, I think, did a pretty good job during his time with the Flames as head coach during the regular season. Of course, they probably would have liked to have things gone a little different in the playoffs, and I still think there's a pretty good chance we're going to see a bit of a shakeup in the Flames organization amongst the actual players, but we'll see what Brad Treliving does on that front. But for right now, he feels like he's got his guy with the head coaching position in Jeff Ward. Now, as I mentioned, we also have some news on a potential extension that would keep Alex Ovechkin in Washington, likely to the end of his career. There's reports out of Russia that indicate that Ovechkin and the Caps are negotiating on a 3 to 5 year contract extension, somewhere between $9.5 to $10 million. Now, Ovechkin signed a really, really long-term contract, one of those crazy long-term ones that he and Crosby did before the NHL changed the rules on contract length a number of years ago. Of course, he's nearing the end of that, and there's obviously a lot of talk and speculation around his future. Of course, Ovechkin still certainly seems to be more than capable of producing at a high level to NHL. Many wonder if he'll stick around in the NHL long enough to really have a shot at chasing Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal record. So we'll see what he does here. If he signs a 5-year contract extension, I do believe that would keep him in Washington until the age of 40, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously that gives him a bit of a bump in pay as well, $9.5 to $10 million. So we'll see if we get any more movement on that or anything official once we get to the free agency period, when players like Ovechkin can officially sign contract extensions to extend once they're technically within the final year of their contract. So that could be big news for Washington. Obviously, you know, they're a team who could see some transition over the next few years as some of their top stars get a little bit older. They're in the midst of hiring a new head coach, which is rumored to be either Mike Babcock, Peter Laviolette, or Gerard Gallant. The Caps are interviewing those guys, negotiating and all that, so we'll see how they decide to proceed with that. But it could be great news out of the Caps organization if they extend their captain here for another long period of time. Now, as I mentioned, we have some more NHL trade rumors I want to take a look at today. First up, let's talk about the Edmonton Oilers. Now, the Oilers are a team has been heavily rumored really since they've been out of the playoffs that they're chasing a change in goal. Seems to be pretty accurate right now that Mike Smith likely does not return. They do have Mikko Koskinen in net for a couple more years under contract at over $4 million. So clearly that's not a contract that I know personally I'm not overly fond of, but obviously, depending on what else they bring in to play with Koskinen between the pipes, they can't have anything too crazy expensive because they just don't have the space to have a ton of money tied up in that other role, whether it's going to be somebody who plays a 1A, 1B, or maybe does Koskinen play more of a backup role? Difficult to say. They had previously been linked to Matt Murray of the Penguins, and it was believed the asking price was a 2020 first-round selection, which they felt was too steep of a price tag, and now there's believed that maybe the Oilers are not going to be involved in those trade talks anymore, that they might be out on Murray, at least for the time being. Not to say they couldn't jump back in, depending on how things materialize here, but there's the latest word as we've seen numerous reports indicating that they're really pushing hard for goaltender Darcy Kuemper of the Arizona Coyotes. Now, obviously, the way Kuemper has played the past couple of years, he'd be a terrific pickup for Edmonton or Calgary or any other team that really makes the acquisition. He's got a great contract, just over $4 million as well for a couple more years. So clearly, it would be a pretty good steal for them to get a player like that out of Arizona. Of course, the Coyotes are, involved in a bit of a scandal where they're being penalized by the NHL, lost a bunch of draft picks, and they have new owners. There's been some reports as well that the Coyotes ownership is looking to cut payroll by as much as possibly $10 million, and they'd really like to recoup as much of those draft picks as possible to be able to restock the cupboards for the future. And they might be considering kind of going through a bit of a rebuild here, even though they've really never completed coming out of one. They did get to the point where they made the play-in series and then qualified for the playoffs this year, but that's the first time in quite some time that they were able to do that. And there's been a lot of talk that Kuemper and captain Oliver Ekman-Larsson would be their main two big trade pieces that they could send out of town to recoup a bunch of future assets, including several high-round draft picks to make up for what they've lost here between what they traded for Taylor Hall and what they're being penalized here by the NHL. Now, looking at the Edmonton Oilers situation and what they could offer Arizona, I'm not sure they're going to be able to give them a ton of draft picks. I mean, as far as the 2020 draft goes, they have their first-round pick, which is, a decent selection, but then they don't have a second, third, or fourth round pick, so it makes sense why Ken Holland was really reluctant to move that first rounder, because if he does, they're not going to have a pick in the first 4 rounds of a really deep draft. So that's probably not great for their long-term stability here for having young players come into the organization every few years. They do have their 2021 first-round pick, which could be in consideration here, and they do have several other younger pieces that could be looking to move here within other different trades. Of course, the Oilers do have a guy like Jesse Puljujarvi, who's an interesting, still kind of a prospect that teams could be looking into. They got Andreas Athanasiou, who they acquired from the Red Wings, who's a pending RFA, who they may not re-sign, who's got a lot of speed, former 30-goal guy. They do have some other interesting prospects they could consider trading as well, whether it be Tyler Benson or Ryan McLeod or Caleb Jones. Get Raphael Lavoie in there as well. I would think prospects like Bouchard and Broberg are probably untouchable at this point, but you never know what Holland's thinking, I guess, in that regard. So clearly, they do have some currency here that could still help the Coyotes restock the cupboards a little bit if they want to make a push here. Now, of course, we don't have a deal as of yet, so it's difficult to say what the exact asking price is. We know that the Coyotes GM right now is interim GM Steve Sullivan, who's obviously new to the role. Ken Holland's a longtime veteran, so maybe he's trying to find a way to kind of take advantage of that. I don't know, and I'm not sure how much leeway Sullivan has to do these deals without ownership being involved to sign off on them as well, because they're still in the midst of determining who's going to be their permanent GM moving forward. So it should be interesting to see if the Oilers can pull this off, but adding a guy like Darcy Kuemper would be a great fit, but what exactly is the asking price going to be? Difficult to say. Now, sticking with the Oilers, there's also some talk that they could be possibly looking at forward Jake DeBrusk of the Boston Bruins. Now, there's been a lot of reports out of Bruins media that they could be obviously making some changes, that Don Sweeney probably going to shake things up here. Obviously, that group of guys that have been there a long time are really solid. They're core players, but could have a bit of a shake-up this year. Obviously, you got guys like Bergeron and Marchand, Krejci, you got Zdeno Chara, Tuukka Rask. They're not getting any younger, and maybe they need to shake things up within that organization to have a shot at continuing to contend and being a top team. Now, there's a lot of debate whether they're going to have any chance to re-sign defenseman Torrey Krug, because he's made it clear he's looking for term and money, and they may not be in a position to be able to offer that, so they might not be able to retain his services, and they are apparently considering moving Jake DeBrusk as well. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that they do that, but obviously if they did, for him to go west, it would certainly probably be welcome for him where he's originally from. Obviously, Jake DeBrusk has been a pretty solid player for them through his ELC, but it's had inconsistent, didn't have a great playoff run here in 2020. I think they should be careful with moving him because obviously, like I said, their core players are getting older. They're going to need some younger guys to kind of, eventually kind of move up here and take over, and he could be one of those players, but they may not have the appetite to pay him the $5 million or so that he's looking for. The Oilers might see that as an opportunity to add a scoring winger to play with a guy like Connor McDavid, and it could be a good fit there. So there's obviously no guarantee that happens. Something both teams are kind of toying with the possibility of moving DeBrusk, where they're looking at the possibility of making the acquisition. So I'm not sure how far along talks have gone. I've just seen reports indicating that, that it's something that's possibility, and it kind of makes sense from both sides. Obviously, I'm not sure the Oilers could do a deal for DeBrusk and Kuemper. They technically could with the cap space they have available, but it would be difficult to pull off. It really depends on what goes out. Now, what would Boston want in return for a Jake DeBrusk trade is debatable. I mean, they might want obviously a lot of younger pieces as well, and they might have to part with something a little bit more significant where they're losing Torrey Krug on the blue line. They may want a guy like a Broberg or a Bouchard in return to make that happen, and I don't know if the Oilers wouldn't make that move. So difficult to say if they can even pull it off, but it's some interesting moves to consider for both sides, and we'll see what happens if anything develops on that. But I guess some interesting concepts. So let me know your thoughts down below. If you're Edmonton especially, are those moves that you would consider doing? What kind of price tag would you be willing to pay? And if you're Boston especially and you do move DeBrusk, what does the package going back have to look like to make it worth your while? Because, I mean, you do have some young guys like Jack Studnicka who can probably take DeBrusk's role over and maybe even be a stronger player longer term. It's debatable. I think he's got a lot of upside, but they have to be careful here as they move out the younger guys and keep a hold of those aging players. They're going to have guys to take over longer term. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have an interesting tidbit I came across on Twitter regarding a potential deal and some talks involving the Maple Leafs and the Blues. Now, I'll caution you, I'm bringing this up because I found it as an interesting piece of conversation, but based on the source, I'm not sure how reliable this is as of yet, so I try to make sure I always let you guys know where the information is coming from, so we can either think of it as being pretty serious, likely to happen, that there's, what's going on behind the scenes, or some things we have to take with a grain of salt, and it's really just more as a discussion point to say, what if this were true? What do you think? And that's exactly what this scenario is. Now, this information, and I'll post it here on the screen, comes from Twitter via Howard Berger, who used to work with the Fan 590 in Toronto. He's a Toronto media writer, writes about the Leafs a lot. His site is called betweenthepost.ca, and he put this information here out on Twitter in the last 24 hours, indicating that he has sources that says the Leafs and the Blues are talking, and it could involve the rights to defenseman Alex Pietrangelo, and could it involve William Nylander or Freddie Anderson? Now, when I first seen this tweet, my first instinct was, what? Really? Could they actually be having that conversation? And the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe they could be. I've seen numerous reports from more sources that I'm familiar with on the Pietrangelo St. Louis side of things that indicates that Alex Pietrangelo is really frustrated with the situation in St. Louis, that the fact that he's not signed as of yet, he's seen a lot of these other defensemen be acquired and signed, other players be looked after. Meanwhile, their captain has been waiting for a deal, and nothing really gets started on it until after their season was over. So you know what? Maybe they're kind of playing a role here that maybe they need to have something in their back pocket, and they need to consider trading his rights if it makes sense that they cannot get a deal done. Because obviously, you see that happen a lot. We just saw a trade the other day with Montreal and Carolina. Joel Edmondson going to Montreal. Carolina decided they probably weren't signing this player. They can get a late round pick in return. Makes sense. Now, in the case of Pietrangelo, though, the players mentioned by this guy on Twitter about being involved here, I don't see a scenario where it really makes sense for St. Louis to go after Freddie Anderson. They just traded Jake Allen. They're likely going to extend Jordan Binnington. They're going to have Ville Husso be the backup, who's already under contract. Unless there was a third team involved and it was a bigger deal, I just don't see how that makes any sense at all. Now, William Nylander would make sense if they were going to make an acquisition, because clearly with the Leafs and their cap situation, they don't have a ton of space. They have other players they need to sign. Pietrangelo, no doubt, would be a great fit to be that top pair right shot defenseman. He's going to command a lot of money, obviously. We're probably looking at around $9 million or more, maybe even more, to get him under contract. So should they do that, they would have to shed salary, and Nylander probably would be the most logical choice to go. It could even be a bigger package of other players going on both sides too. We're looking at their Blues roster. They wouldn't really need much of a defenseman in return. Obviously losing Petro would be a big blow, but they have plenty of other D there. Maybe they want one of the Leafs young D in return, like Calle Rosen or Timothy Liljegren, something to that effect to kind of restock a little bit. Maybe within the goaltending situation, and like I said, I don't see Anderson being involved. That doesn't make sense unless there's other pieces, another team. Within the forward group, if you look at the Blues, they do have good depth at the center position. They have some veteran guys like an Alex Steen, Tyler Bozak that probably could be moved in some capacity to make salary space. And then you've got some question marks on the wings. You get a guy like Tarasenko, who's been injured a lot. Maybe having another guy like Nylander who can be a high-scoring winger might make sense for them. But at the end of the day, I'm just not sure we can trust the source here. So again, I caution you to take this with a grain of salt. It's just for discussion. I'm not sure on the source, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are. If the Maple Leafs had the opportunity to bring in Pietrangelo's signing rights and get him signed, but they had to give up a guy like William Nylander to do it, what are your thoughts on that kind of move? Do you think it makes sense? Should the Leafs pursue that? And let me know down in the comments so we can discuss further. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's well known that Pietrangelo seems to be very frustrated with the situation. At this point, as longer it drags on, I do think it's increasing that he could leave. But I still wouldn't be shocked if they found a way to kind of make it up here and get it back together and get a deal done for him to stay in St. Louis. But, you know, it seems like there's a lot of players linked to the Leafs because there's so many Toronto media people kind of talking about scenarios and all that. So we do have to be cautious with how serious we take some of these reports. But I don't know who this guy's sources are, but if he indeed has sources that know what they're talking about, this is a very interesting scenario. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.